right. So we have another awesome episode today. Deb, I'm not saying that because Deb's not here. As much as I would love to say that, we talk a lot of crap about each other when that one person's not here. But it's an awesome episode because my former classmate and also coworker,
Yeah.
Andraya Barnard, is here with us today. How's it going?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited to have you on the show. Usually we start the show off by explaining how we're connected, and it's actually really funny how you and I are connected. I was just telling my wife this. So you and I went to elementary school together for a few years.
hmm
Actually,
hmm
my very first Valentine uh, was you.
That's right. You came to my house when we were like in third grade.
Yeah, and I'm sure you
Yeah.
feel the same way. It was incredibly awkward for me. My family was like, "Hey, you should do it." I'm like,
Do
"But
it. Do it.
do I
Yeah.
have to though?"
Yeah.
And
I
especially
know.
back then, like if anybody if you could go back then and talk to teachers and classmates and parents that
Mhm.
knew me, and you could go in the future now and say, "Hey, he's gonna do a podcast one day," they'd be like, "No,
Yeah.
not the same Josh Takimoto.
You
There's
were
no way."
very, very reserved, very
Super
quiet.
reserved. And
Yeah.
I'm still super introverted, but I love podcasting so much I can get past it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I do remember that my family's like, "Hey, that girl that you kind of like at school, you should give her a Valentine." It's like, okay. And then I just
Oh.
remember like even like just being at your door, I'm like, oh, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
And and if I remember correctly, I don't even think you were there. I should have talked to my mom. I don't think you were actually there at the door to receive it.
I think I was like in the shower. I was doing something
You were
completely.
you were
Yeah. I was
hiding.
like,
It's like,
what?
yeah.
What? What are you
this
talking
Takamo
about?
this Takamoto kid's here. I gotta hide. I'm doing something else. But no, I do remember that was kind of a funny way. I've never you that's a first on this podcast. My first
There we
Valentine.
go. There we
Um,
go.
yeah, that was not something that's common on this podcast. So but yeah, we went to elementary school together for a little bit. And
Yeah.
the funny thing is too, is I didn't realize that you and I were going to high school together. I don't know if you knew this. I didn't realize until our senior breakfast,
hmm
when I think our parents were talking and my mom was like, "Hey, do you remember?" I think she still called you Annie at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's like, "You remember Annie?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." And even like
Yeah.
that moment, like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" I didn't realize
Yeah.
you were in the same class as me. I didn't realize we were going to the same
Yeah.
school. No clue.
I didn't go back. I didn't come back to the area till 10th grade. So
And
that
see,
was
I had
fun.
yeah.
Starting I knew high school in 10th grade. It was amazing.
Now, when you say that, were you coming back from like
So
somewhere in
we moved to
Sacramento?
we moved to Las Vegas actually for a couple of years. So
Oh no, that would be brutal.
it's wonderful.
Yeah, I bet. Well, so I went from Pershing to Pasteur, and at that
hmm
time, not a lot of people were going from Pershing to Pasteur. Everybody was going to
Right.
Carnegie, and I remember the
Right.
first 2 weeks were brutal. I mean,
Yeah.
like I'll be honest, like, and I'm not ashamed to say this. Like I was in tears the first few days. Like
Oh,
I'm
I'm
like,
sure.
I'm like,
I've
Mom, I
heard
don't know anybody.
stories.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
horrible. I'm like, I don't know
Yeah.
anybody. And then obviously it's just part of life, right? You get to know people and make friends, and then it's all good. But when you're young at
Yeah.
that point, you're thinking, this is horrible. And that was
Brutal.
me going from like, a couple miles difference, right? You
hmm
like a different state. And so
I
that had to have
went,
been
no,
brutal.
yeah. I actually went from fifth fifth grade to a Christian school for a couple of years. And then
Okay.
I went from that school. So in eighth grade, then I started a school in Vegas. And then I went there eighth and ninth grade. And then I came back here to CASA where nobody that we went to elementary school went. So it's
No.
just so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Four
Yeah.
schools.
That's brutal. Yeah, no, I can't even
Yeah.
imagine. And especially for this show called Connectable,
Mhm.
it's tough to make connections when you're bouncing
Yeah.
around that much. But
Yeah.
you seem okay now though. Like it
Oh, I'm
seems like
doing
you're doing
just fine.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
You survived.
Somehow
Uh,
I survived. Yeah.
well done. You made it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so then like I said, didn't know we went to high school together at all. No
hmm
clue until senior breakfast.
hmm
And then obviously we graduated that next day, and then
hmm
at the place I work now, didn't realize you started working there, and I was in the mailroom
hmm
at the time, and I remember there was a lady that brought you down to kind of show you around,
hmm
and I went to give her mail, and then I saw you, and you're just kind of smiling and staring. I'm like, I don't know who this person is.
Small world.
I know,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, I don't know who this is, and then you're like, hey, do you remember me? And as soon as you said that, then it clicked. Like, thank God it
Yeah.
clicked,
Yeah.
because there's been so many times where like, hey, do you remember me? I'm
This
like,
is awkward.
I have no clue who you are. Luckily it did click. I'm like, oh, hey, it's
Oh
good to
yeah.
see you. So
Yeah.
yeah, kind of just a random path of kind of some random connections there. But
For sure. sure.
That's probably the most bizarre connection that I've ever had to explain before. Like,
Yeah, right.
all over the map.
Legit.
Yeah. Especially like I've never sat down, like I've told my wife that before, but I've never like actually
Mhm.
sat down and said, oh yeah, this is kind of how we know each other. Yeah, all over the map. Like
Right.
very strange. But like you said,
Right.
small world. It really is a
Yeah,
small world.
it is.
So I'm really excited to talk to you on this podcast. You know, we were kind of chatting beforehand. The reason why, I mean, there's a ton of stuff. Just we've followed each other on social media for quite a while now. There's a ton of stuff that like we could talk about, and we'll probably touch on some of that stuff. But the main thing is, you recently posted about your son, who has type 1 diabetes. And how old is your son?
He's 9.
9. Okay, and I think your post said it was set this year was the 7-year
7
anniversary
year. Yeah.
of
So
that
he was diagnosed
diagnosis,
when he was 2.5. Yeah.
which is wild. I have a 3-year-old girl and a 1-year-old girl. So we're kind of in that age range right now. And I mean, I can't even imagine, without even knowing your full story, just the thought of that is just kind of terrifying for me. But like, tell me a little bit. It's a big question, but like, tell me a little bit about how you found out and the journey that you've been on since then.
Sure. Yeah. So when he was like 2.5, this was actually like the week before Memorial Day, and he just was acting different. You know, as a parent, you just know something's wrong with my kid. And so I took him in, and they were like, oh, I think he just has the flu. Like, he's fine, you know. But I was like, okay. So another couple of days go by, and I took him back in, and I was like, something's just not normal with my kid. Like, at this point, he was still in diapers. He was like learning how to potty train, but he had actually peed through his diaper, through his stroller. And I was like, that's not normal, you know? And the second doctor was like, it's probably just a cold. It's probably just a flu. It's not a big deal. And I was like, again, I know my kid. And so that was like maybe like a Monday and like a Wednesday. And then by Saturday, we were at a friend's birthday party, and there's kids playing around, and he's just like standing in the field, just like looking around, like all lethargic and out of it. And I'm like, I'm telling you, something is wrong with him. And then we had dinner with my ex-husband, my husband at the time. We had dinner with his mom that Sunday, and we were telling her what was going on. And she was like, she's worked in schools forever. And so she's like, I think you should take him in like tomorrow to the, you know, whatever doctor's open. And it was a holiday. So we just went to the main hospital. And at this point, he was non-responsive. So he was just laying on my husband's shoulder. And we're like, okay, this is really bad. Like, we don't know what's wrong with him, but we take him in, and, you know, she's just checking him out, the doctor. And she was like, you know, I think he's all right. Like, I don't know, like maybe he just needs some fluids and, you know, whatever. And I was just like, this isn't okay. Like, I mean, what do you do? I'm not a doctor. Like, I don't know. I didn't know at the time. You don't know, you have to be an advocate until you have to be an advocate. And now I'm like, shh, you know, this is like the one story that you can tell anybody, and you're like, this is crazy. Yeah. So she's getting ready to walk out the door, and she's like, you know what, I'm going to send a nurse in really quick, and we're just going to do a quick little finger prick to test his blood. And then, you know, you guys can be on your way. And I'm like, okay. So she comes in, and he does like a little finger prick, you know, like you do when you're going to give blood. Like, it's super simple. It's not even as invasive as the when you draw blood. And she leaves and comes back in, and the doctor comes back in like in tears. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? You know? And she's like, we're going to need you guys to go to the ICU like right now. And I was like, oh, for what? You know, what's going on? And she's like, well, his blood sugar is elevated. And at this point, I'm like, I don't even know what my blood pressure is supposed to be. Like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about. You know what I mean? Like, it's all those numbers that you're like, okay, is that good? Is that bad? Sure. Right. They're like, no, his blood sugar is elevated. You got to go to the ICU right now. And we're like, okay, like, we're going. And then as we're walking there, they're explaining that he's got type 1 diabetes. They think he does, because his blood sugar at the time was like 317. And the normal range for people that your body generally regulates at is 80 to 120. And so you have to understand, this is also like a week basically of dehydration, because he's peeing through everything. Right. And he wasn't really eating much either. And he was just like really lethargic and not active. And so they take us to the ICU, they get him all hooked up with everything. And at this point, me and my husband were just like, what the hell is type 1 diabetes? Like, we all know what type 2 diabetes is, you know, and we're like, what's type 1? And obviously, like, as a mother too, like, not knowing what it was, I was like, dude, I made all of his freaking baby food. You know, like I'm like
Yeah.
this granola mom who's just
Yeah.
like all about this life, like totally invested in this kid. And I was just like, he's so healthy. How is this happening? You know, like the sugariest thing he gets is watermelon. Like, what is happening? And they're like, well, okay. So type 1 diabetes is when your pancreas stops working. And it'll go through a honeymoon phase where like your pancreas will start to work sometimes, and then it'll regulate your blood sugar a little bit, and then it stops. And so your pancreas produces insulin. And as a normal functioning body, that insulin takes all of the carbohydrates and the food that you eat and the sugar that you eat, and it breaks it down and turns it into energy. So if you don't have a functioning pancreas, everything that you eat is just not being regulated. So your blood sugar spikes. And if your blood sugar goes too high, your blood basically acidifies. And if your blood goes too low, you can go into a coma. So you're literally balancing life and death like on a regular basis. And we're just sitting here like, can we do this? It's like when you have a baby for the first time, you know, and they're like, okay, bye, on your way. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know what to do. Like, this is crazy.
That drive home, right? That drive home from the hospital was like, ooh, the
Scary.
reality hits for
Like,
sure.
this
Yeah.
is a whole nother life. Like, I have to do this now. Are you sure
Right.
you don't want this? You can't take it back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we were in the hospital for like 3 days. What I also thought was really interesting, I have Kaiser. I have mixed feelings about Kaiser. I think they're all right for a lot of things, but I also have heard horror stories. And this situation for me was not ideal because this was now the third doctor that saw him and tried to pass him off. And we had found out that day that had we gone home, he would have died. And so, you know, thankfully, like that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But what I thought was really interesting was that the first meal they chose to give him while we're in the hospital was like pancakes and cereal and like all of this like very high sugar, starchy crap. And I was just like, you just told me that my child is like a type 1 diabetic who's not supposed to be eating any of this crap, not to mention like, why right now? Like he's not working. His body's like broken, you know?
Yeah.
I still don't understand why they did that because I know he was on like an IV for the insulin at the time, but it was just very bizarre.
Interesting. Well,
Again,
I was gonna follow up, and sorry not to cut you off. I was gonna follow up and ask if they eventually came back with a reason, but never. I mean,
they
even
did
to
it.
this day.
They never did. Nope.
Interesting. Which
And
it seems like at that point for that specific type of situation, like everything that they do is educational at that point for you guys. So it seems like they would. So that's really bizarre that they didn't.
yeah, I think they were just trying to get him to eat, quite
Okay.
honestly.
Okay.
And they were just trying to push anything they could at him because he had lost weight, you know, within that week. And he was just so little, right? He's 2.5. He's a little guy. I don't even know how much he weighed, probably only like 30 pounds. Like he was small.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were there for a few days and then they're trying to like run us through on training, like, oh, well, this is what you're going to have to do. So because his pancreas stopped working basically, or it was in that honeymoon phase where it was kind of working, kind of not, they sent us home. I mean, I have a picture somewhere and it's like this whole table full of supplies. And you're like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. Like, I don't know if I'm qualified to do this. And they gave us all of these packages of syringes. The needle's super tiny, but they're still syringes. And then they gave us all this insulin. And and the little lines on the syringes are so tiny that you're like, and I mean, if you poke yourself, right, being like a normal functioning pancreatic person, it's not good. I mean, you can go to the hospital just from getting any additional insulin into your body. And so we're like, oh my gosh, like, how can I do this? What if I mess it up completely, you know? And
Which is, sorry, again, it's just going back to what you were saying about like when you go home with a baby for the first time. When you have a baby, most people go to the hospital courses, right? Like there's 4 or 5 courses that you go to leading up to the moment of birth, which is preparing you for not only the birth, but then also post-birth, like what to expect, how to change a diaper, how to breastfeed, all those different things. This is a very different situation because after these 3 days, it's like very like a crash course. Like, here you go, here's the needles, all this stuff. So it's like, you know what I mean? It's a very, like you said, it's like that same feeling, but compacted. And then it comes life and death too. So it's
legit,
a very, very strange thing. Sorry, go ahead.
3 days. I know, it was crazy. And I mean, the most terrifying and shitty part of all of it is that So a lot of people have a pump, which I can discuss in a minute. And that, has the insulin actually already in it and it's connected to their body 24/7. But when you're first diagnosed, they don't give you a pump, obviously. And so you're just forced to like inject him with this syringe every time his blood sugar is over a certain amount. I think at that point we were doing over 180 just to make sure that he wasn't dropping too low. And then they were also having us dose him like now every time he eats anything. That's like over 5 grams of carbs. So like if you look at a package for anything that you eat, we don't go off of sugar. We go where it says total carbohydrate and then the serving size. And that's what he gets dosed for even to this day. And so they're like, okay, well, he's 2.5, but he already picked up like within the first few days, he was like, I'm not eating. If I have to get a pokey every time I'm hungry, I just won't eat, and he boycotted food for like a few days. And we're like, this is not, we don't, you're calling the doctor 24/7. You're like, I don't understand what to do. And thankfully, I think it only took us maybe a month, maybe 2 months. It was in August. So May, like 3 months to get a pump, thankfully. But I'll tell you what, nothing prepares you as a parent to watch your child look at you with those eyes of like, why are you hurting me? Like you're enjoying it or something, and they're screaming, he's crying. It's like the end of the world. And then it's done and he's eating and he's happy. And you're like in the freaking hallway, sobbing your eyes out. Like, I can't believe that I have to do this. Like, this is not what I signed up for, and then it just goes to lead to the fact that like, when you're lucky enough, you don't realize you're lucky enough to have a kid who can just eat whatever they want, whenever they want. You're still a healthy parent. You're trying to like regulate things that they're having. All of that changes when you have a type 1 diabetic child, because he has to get insulin for literally everything he eats over like 5 grams of carbs. I mean, I think if he has like carrots, cheese, meat, certain meats or whatever, that's it. That's it. Those are the only things that you don't dose for. And so it's not, I mean, and now he's 9, right? So I have like this whole jar of gummy bears, and when he's having something, because I'll check his blood and I'm like, why are you 300? What is happening right now? And sure enough, like the jar's like that much lower. And I'm like, cool. Summer's great. I work from home, right? So it's like I can't just regulate him 24/7.
Right.
But we don't try to stop him from eating things like that, because he's a kid and I don't want him to feel like he can't have it. He just has to dose for it. But I mean, you don't know how your body processes things either until you have a type 1, where I didn't realize like he could eat watermelon one day and it'll be fine, won't spike him. And then another day it'll bring his blood sugar up 50 points or something. So even when he's low, like under 80, we'll say today he was down to like 40, which is, I mean, a lot of kids would go into a coma. Right. And then they're at the hospital, and knock on wood, like I haven't taken him to the hospital once for a high or a low blood sugar. But then we have like these little sugar gummies that we give him, or juice when he's low. And that's what we take to school most of the time. But it's definitely a team effort, being at school as well. It's a lot. It's a lot to process.
Yeah, no, I mean, even for me
on a daily basis.
Well, I know, I was gonna say, because it's not something like you mentioned, the doctors 3 times said, hey, it's just the flu, it's just a cold, it's a sickness, right? Yeah, those things suck when you're a parent and you're dealing with those types of things. It's not fun for anybody. We just did it recently, but you also know that there's an end in sight, right? Like know that little Tylenol, some sleep, some rest, and they'll be good. You don't get that benefit, unfortunately. Like, no, it's like, hey, you make it through one episode.
Life. He's like, when's it gonna go away? And I'm like, when they come up with a cure, well, why haven't they come up with a cure? And I'm like, I cannot talk about big pharma with you right now, child. Like, you are not gonna understand the world and just eat the gummy bears.
Yeah, just eat the gummy bears.
Just eat the fucking gummy bears. Calm down,
man. Well, that's an interesting part of it too, because obviously this started when he was 2, And I'm assuming that a lot of people that listen to this podcast have kids who have at least been around kids.
Right.
2 years old, they can do a lot of things. They start becoming little people, but communication is still tough. And
Yeah.
so when they're sick, when they're hurt, trying to figure out what's exactly wrong is really
Right.
difficult. So like even hearing you talk about that, like brings some stress up in me, because I'm like, man, you know what I'm saying? Trying to communicate with a 2-year-old about why, like you said, why do you keep poking my finger? Hey, why do I feel this way? Why do we have to keep doing this? It's like, man, it's a lot. It's a lot for sure. And so
he just started recognizing like his body, when he's high or when he's low, his blood sugar, like he could feel it, but he didn't start recognizing and like vocalizing what that actually felt like until like this last year. He just started recognizing, you know what, mom, I feel low. And I'm like, what does that feel like? And he says he feels really kind of sleepy and he feels kind of out of it. And he feels just really run down. And when he's high, he gets headaches, his stomach hurts, it's just kind of like, I'm glad he feels it.
Yeah.
Because, there's times when we'll check his blood and he'll be, in the 100s and he's great. He'll eat something, we'll dose, everything seems fine. And then within an hour, he's like, I feel low. And he's down to 40. And you're like, but
yeah. What? And so I just want to let you know too, I didn't mention this beforehand. Sometimes I take notes, so I am paying attention when I look down and I'm writing stuff. I always feel bad, like if I don't say it ahead of time, they're like, "Are you texting while I'm talking?" I'm like pouring my heart out, and you're just texting away, just taking notes so I don't forget certain thoughts or ideas. But I have to say, like it would be terrifying because doctors are kind of known to just be very, I don't want to say cold, but like very even keel, right? And so they're used to dealing with horrible things all the time. They don't want to freak the patient out. But for the doctor to come in with tears, that had to have been just a terrifying thing.
Oh my God, for sure. I mean? You're like, wait, what?
Like you're supposed to be cool. Like you're the calm one here.
I'm sorry. What does that mean?
You're crying. Like, what are we doing? Yeah.
Because she knew that if she would have sent us home, he would have gone, and I'm just so grateful that didn't happen. But that's like, anytime I post about his, like, we call it a die-versary. So anytime we post about the day that he was diagnosed, I always try to say something along the lines of like, if these are the symptoms of type 1 diabetes, there's excessive urination, they're tired, they're just acting really fussy, they're just acting like they're not themselves. If you're older, like teenagers who get diagnosed, they usually go on a rampage and they're just eating nonstop, like, and they're not drinking enough water, or they're drinking too much water and nothing's satiating them. So those are the symptoms. And it's literally a finger prick that takes 2 seconds, and that can literally save their life. I know a lot of teenagers actually don't make it, or they go to the hospital more often because they don't want to deal with it. They're at that age. Yeah. They're like, I don't want to do this. I'm different. What's the benefit for us is that he was only 2.5. And so he didn't know anything different. He didn't know eating habits where he could just go and grab things and eat whatever he wanted. And I can't even imagine a teenager being diagnosed and having to, change their whole life. Actually, another girl that we went to high school with, Mandy, she was diagnosed in her early 20s, I want to say.
What's
and we've talked about this a lot. No, oh my gosh. I don't know. I'll have to get back to you on that. Starts with the C, Mandy C.
I'm blanking too. There's a couple of Mandys that come to mind, but I'm not.
Mandy C. Yeah. So, again, you're like an adult, right? And you've and then you have to think too, like type 1, because having to dose for all the carbohydrates, like alcohol, right? All of that is affected by your pancreas not working, so you're like, how am I going to dose for this? And me and his dad, my ex, we always joke about this, like, maybe he won't be a partier, like maybe we'll get lucky.
Yeah.
Because it's a whole nother ball game. I actually remember one time before I even had my son, I was working for the Contractor State License Board, and I just had gone to like food source or something on lunch to grab something. And this is like really dark. So the check lady was just bawling her eyes out. And I'm like, what's happening? And she's working. I'm like, go take a break, lady. Like, what's going on? But she's talking to this guy in front of me, and he's a regular apparently. And he's like, what is wrong? Like, she's like, my son just died. And I was like, okay, like, here we go. Like, this is intense. And he's like, well, what happened? And she's like, well, him and his friends were out partying and he passed out, and they just thought that he passed out, but he had actually gone into a coma because he's a diabetic.
Oh,
And that story stuck with me forever because I'm like, holy shit, that's so tragic. And at the time, I still didn't know anything about type 1 diabetes, but I was like, oh my God, like he consumed so much alcohol, went into a coma, and nobody helped him because they were all drunken idiots at the time.
sure.
But then when I have a kid, or I think it's diagnosed, it's like the first story that comes to mind. And I'm like, holy shit, what am I going to do? Like,
yeah. How would it not be the first story, for sure?
it's crazy. It's crazy. So,
yeah. Well, especially at that age too. I mean, I think for anybody, whether you're a partier or not, like as a teenager, there's that sense of, especially once you hit like middle school, right? There's that sense of invincibility. Like, yeah, you can do anything. There's, I mean, like I still feel that at 33 sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I'm not going to get hurt. I'm not going to break my leg. But yeah, it's like I'm not going to get hurt. And then, come up limping. It's like, oh yeah, actually this does hurt a lot more now that I'm older. But like, I think that, that parents that are in that situation have to deal with that feeling of like, they already feel invincible. And then when you throw that on top of it, it's like, hey, you like, no one is, but you really aren't, because of your current situation. Like it's not a game anymore, but trying to convey that to someone who, is trying to, I guess, find their independence, fit in, find their independence, find their own voice at that point. That's a tough battle. That's a tough battle, but
it is.
Like you said, maybe, I mean, as much as it sucks that you guys had to deal with it at such a young age, it almost becomes like a normal part of life, right? Where it's like,
it is. Yeah.
This is what I've got to do, rather than trying to accept that reality at that point.
It's interesting because you would think after 7 years and him being young when it happened, that on some level, maybe he'd be used to it by now. You would think, like, logically, but he's not. Like, it just until this last year, like I want to say since the school year until now, so like from August until now, he just started handling his site changes. So I'll talk about his pump in a second, but like he just started handling those without screaming and crying. And you're like, this has been 7 years where, okay, so he has this insulin pump, and it's basically, there's a contact and a detach. It's a tube with 2 little stickers. One sticker has a needle attached to it, connects to another sticker, and then from that tube connects another tube that goes to this insulin. That's what actually goes inside of his pump. And so they do it like that so that if it gets yanked off, it won't just yank out of his body. So there's like one first point of contact that happens. And that needle stays in his body 24/7. We change it like every 3 or 4 days. And, we've asked him, would you rather just have regular pokies, because you don't have to carry it on you. Like he has to wear like a little belt, or he puts it in his pocket. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. And it's actually easier for us, because it's in his body. It's like a little machine. And so, when we check his blood on his little meter, that information transfers over to the pump. And then that blood sugar gets picked up on the pump. And so it's like, okay, let's just say he's high, right? He's 200 and something. Then if he's eating something, it will put the carbohydrates in, and it'll calculate how high he is versus the carbs, and then dose the insulin based on that. So it's like a no-brainer for you as a parent or the person actually wearing the pump.
Sure.
And if he's high and he's not eating, it'll still dose him for the high if you just do like 0 carbohydrates. So it's a lot easier, but again, you have to wear it on your body 24/7. And so because that gets changed every 3 to 4 days, again, you would think he'd be used to it on some level by now. But I mean, up until this last year, I was still having to hold him down while he would scream. And it's literally like just a quick little poke. It's done and it's on him. And sometimes he gets irritated. Sometimes he cries and we have to change it again. And then on the top of that, he has to wear this little blood sugar sensor on his arm. He doesn't have to. We kind of stopped doing it for a long time because it always falls off in the water. And what that does is it reads the blood sugar. It keeps like a little, some of them have just like a little ribbon, and others have like a tiny, tiny, tiny little, it's not a needle, but it's almost like a wire, so to speak, but it's really thin, really flexible. And that stays in their body. So like if you'll see commercials, where people are wearing those on their arms, it actually checks their blood sugar 24/7. so that you don't have to do as many finger pricks, but they're not very accurate. I mean, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. I like it because it'll alert my phone and tell me if he's high or if he's low, which is good. But again, it's not accurate. So like we end up checking his blood, I mean, at least every 2 to 3 hours, if not in between then, because he's going to be eating. And so it's a nonstop gig, you know.
Yeah, you're not lying.
For life.
For life. Jeez.
For life.
Well, yeah. Well, and there's a Nicole, who's a good friend of my co-host Deb. She listens to the show all the time. She's listening to this right now, I'm sure. Her daughter, who's who's graduated from college at this point. I think we interviewed her on a different podcast, but her daughter on a different podcast, but and Nicole, forgive me, I can't remember, but she has diabetes as well. But she found out when she was either in college or high school. I can't remember. Must be high school. And so it's interesting because hearing them talk about it and hearing her daughter talk about it, and like all this knowledge that her mom picked up from this whole situation, and then hearing you, it really is crazy how parents in the situation like gather and collect all this knowledge.
Way different.
If I didn't know any better and I didn't know your situation, I'm like, oh, this is what you do for a living. Because that's what it sounds like to me. Because it's like, oh, this sounds like incredibly professional and scientific. Like everything you just said, it's like, oh no, you're a parent who's dealing with it. It's not even your technical job. It's just what you do as a mom. So it's just amazing how much information you're forced to take. You're
forced to learn it. Yeah.
I mean, you really are, right? It's like, you don't want
definitely not something you think, oh, I'm going to learn all this random knowledge one day, but
you don't want to learn about diabetes, but I mean, you have to, you don't have a choice.
I mean, you don't have a choice. You don't. I mean, I could tell you, I have a whole list of just like easy, quick go-to for carbohydrates and all the random foods. And I know what most food carbohydrates are just because 7 years of doing it, it's like, and sometimes we wing it, like, oh, a milkshake. Did you know a milkshake is like sometimes between 100 and 180 freaking carbohydrates? Like, that's how much sugar is in a milkshake. Good luck. Yeah. And then pizza, for instance, like just a regular slice of pizza is 25 carbs. That's not so bad, but pizza takes about an hour to an hour and a half to actually kick in to your blood sugar. So if you dose him right away, insulin also takes about an hour to an hour and a half to work.
Yeah.
So sometimes you get it and it hits right. And other times it's like, he's gone. Milk, something about milk products, milkshakes, ice cream, all that stuff, it hits way later, like sometimes up to like 2 to 3 hours later after he eats it, because we'll dose for it. And then you're like, why is he so high? He's still so high 3 hours later. And it's just the way that it breaks down in their body is just not instant. So
interesting.
Wealth of useless information sometimes,
Yeah. Well, not useless for you though, right? Like
not useless for me and him, but useless when it's like, am I using this? I don't have him today. I guess I don't have to worry about this right now.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I have written down. Is so you had mentioned, I don't want to know about your divorce. I don't need to know about that.
Oh, that's fine.
But
we're cool.
Okay. Well, that's awesome then. Well, that might kind of give me some insight in my next question.
Yeah.
Because obviously it sounds like you guys were still together when the diagnosis happened, and then obviously the split came later. There's a lot of trust that has to, I imagine, from your part, that has to go into not just your relationship with your ex-husband, but like also family, teachers, anybody who at some point will be in like have the care of your son in their hands.
Yeah.
A lot of trust and a lot of stress, I imagine. So like, how do you deal with all of that? Especially in the early stages. I'm sure it's a little bit different now. I'm sure you have certain people that know the situation, know the drill, but like initially, that first time he goes with your ex-husband, or that first time he goes to school, like what was that feeling like?
I mean, I'll tell you what, he still hasn't spent the night at a friend's house.
Sure. It makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, he spends the night at grandparents' house and he's fine. But yeah, I mean, he was so young anyway. So like we got divorced actually when he was only like four and a half, maybe almost 5. And so it was a lot of trust. But thankfully, we were together when it all went down, and he's actually very competent. So, awesome. We trusted each other on a level anyways. Like that was never an issue for us, thankfully. And I know a lot of people don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
But with school was probably the biggest issue that we did have. So when he went into kindergarten, he was just about 6. So he was 5 and then he turned 6 because of the way that the school year lined up. And when you go to a public school, they actually mandate that a nurse is the one who does all of their insulin, everything.
Okay.
And on the one hand, you think, oh, this is great. Like, this is like primo care. However, it's not, because the issue is my mother-in-law, she actually worked in the office. And we're like, well, this is why he's going to this school, because we're going to have somebody on the inside who can like help us take care of him. And at the time, he was the only type 1 diabetic at the whole school. And the issue that we ran into was that the nurses, because of legality, information, and sensitivity and all that, they would not allow anybody in the school office or anybody outside of the nurses to actually help. And this is like literally to the point where like he can check his own blood and he can dose himself. Even at that point, if they told him what to dose for, he could have done it himself, right? Because it's not rocket science. It's literally a machine that does it for you. You're just entering in a few numbers. And so when we couldn't have anyone actually help us, the issue was they don't keep the nurses on site. And so you're like, okay, well, this is when he's going to get, his lunch or his recess or his breaks. But then they're, like all school politics and people being torn apart and their time divided. And so, the nurses would have to go between like 2 to 4 schools. And so what got to us, this was like part of the reason that we ended up changing him to a Montessori now, is that she would be at another school and he would be feeling low or something, go to the office, and then they would say, oh, we'll be there in like 10 to 15 minutes. And I was like, the fuck you will? No.
Wow.
He's checking his blood right now. I'm not waiting for you to figure that out, because that could literally be life and death. And we've been so lucky that nothing like that has happened, but it was shit like that. And you're like, this is not how it's supposed to be. Like, when you have everything so simple right in front of you and you're saying so bureaucratic, right? You're like, nope, can't do it. It's not on the paper. It's not on the form. And you're like, I don't care what's on the form. And then, so between that, and then there's a before and after care, right? At pretty much every elementary school, but a lot of them aren't actually affiliated with the schools. Like I think this one is Sunrise Rec, but it's on school campus. So the issue we also had with that is that they had got a new director and she was saying that they have a high turnover of staff. And because of that, they would only allow him to be there in the time that he would not have to check his own blood, which was just, it felt like discrimination, because you're like, this is insane, So I couldn't take him to before care. And if I took him to aftercare, which he did do aftercare, he got out of school, I want to say it was at like 3, I don't know, maybe 2 or 1. I can't even remember now. Pick him up within 2 to 3 hours of him being out of school. So like for a very long time, I could not work full time because of that. I couldn't drop him off before school and work and then get off at a reasonable hour to pick him up, because nobody would let him even check his blood. And then at the time, they didn't have a high turnover of staff, because I talked to the same girl every single day and she was great. And it was just this director, not wanting to take on the responsibility, because I get it. Like, it is scary. It's a lot. And that's the biggest issue that we have with him, is that we can't find adequate care for him outside of our family, because people are scared, and they don't want to take the risk. And I get it. I do get it, but it puts us in a really just unfortunate situation. Like, I don't take him to camps yet at this point, because again, that's like 4 to 8 hours a day. And then I have to make sure that they're competent and can actually take care of him or watch what he's eating, because like every 9-year-old, he wants to just have what everyone else is having. And he forgets to dose, which is like, bro, you've had this for 7 years. Like, how do you forget to dose? Like, what are you talking about? But that's our day-to-day life. It's doesn't stop. And then you check him every night too. So we don't even sleep through the night.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, well, again, kind of going back to the comparison you made with having a baby for the first time. You bring the baby home for the first time, and it's tough to sleep, not just because the baby's crying, but because you're so nervous. Like any little movement you hear, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
what's going on? And
Right.
it's kind of the same thing. Like that doesn't end for
Yeah.
you guys either, because you're just constantly,
Mhm.
um, on alert, or like on high alert, which is,
Yeah. Yeah.
is crazy. But from, again, I don't know if I emphasized this enough at the beginning of the show, but like you and I, like as far as we've been connected at different points in life, but
Yeah.
like we don't really know each other. Like,
Right.
this has been cool to hear your story, because
Yeah.
we don't we don't hang out, we don't talk. It's like
Right.
social media
Right.
is pretty much it. So it's cool to
Yeah.
hear this. But based on what I see from social media, it seems like you handle it pretty well. Now, obviously, it's still social media, so once
Yeah. The
you shut the
highlight reel.
photo off, it's like,
Right.
this is
Right.
horrible. But from what I can tell, it seems like you handle it really well. And something else I wanted to mention too, and I mentioned this, we did a Father's Day episode a little while ago with a couple of buddies of mine, but one of the things I mentioned was that my mom has mentioned this multiple times throughout my life, especially once we had our kids. She said, you can tell that your kids are loved because there's so much joy, and like they're smiling all the time, they're laughing, they're having a great time. She's like, when I go to a store, she's like, I can tell there's a kid in the
Yeah.
shopping cart and they're having a great time, and they love life. You can tell that the parents are doing a great job. She's like, on the flip side, you can also tell when there's that kid that doesn't smile. And
Yeah.
she's like, that breaks my heart, because you can just tell by that kid's face that home life is
Yeah.
not great.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say this, like from what I've seen of your son and you guys that interact on social media, it's like obvious that kid is very much loved.
He's
And
living a
like
great
loves
life.
life. Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
From this like little setback, I always heard too, like my mom always said, if they're singing, kids
Yeah,
that
exactly.
sing are happy, and that kid will not shut the fuck up. Like he is,
Yeah.
he's the life of the party. He's he's an only child, right? So he's bossy. If he's inside right now playing on his Switch with a friend who's also sitting on his Switch right next to each other. And
What's better than
this
that?
is
It's a perfect
nothing.
summer day.
It's nothing. It's great for me because I'm like, yay, he's occupied. I'm not don't worry about it.
Exactly.
But no, he's great. Yeah. I mean, obviously, like social media is the highlight reel. And, I'm not posting like every time I have to do a blood sugar check or every time, because I'm just not really that kind of parent, but it's our life. So we don't think twice about it. A lot of my friends and people that I meet, they're like, they wouldn't have even known. They're like, you handle it so well. And I'm like, number one, what choice do you have?
Right.
And number two, what choice do I have? Like, I have to do this all day, every day. So it is second nature. I don't even think twice about it anymore. And the only time that it gets like hard is when he's having a hard day and he's sad and he's just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm like, I'm sorry. And then, he'll be like, he's so smart and manipulative too. He'll be like, you want to do this. You want to hurt me right now. And you're just, and I'm like, this is like when you go in the room and you cry and you're like, how the fuck do you think that? Like, this is, no, I wish you didn't have diabetes either. Like, holy crap, man. Like, you think I want to inject you with a needle and see you cry and look at me like I'm abusing you?
A monster, yeah.
Oh, I'm a monster. I know. And I'm like, oh, this is so awful. So awful.
Man.
But it doesn't happen that often, thankfully. But
sure. Yeah, but enough.
He
right?
plays it up. He plays it up
bet.
any chance he gets. You know?
It's like, today's the day. We haven't done this for a while. Let me
legit.
mention
It's
this to
like
Mom
that
real quick.
sometimes.
Yeah.
she's having a great day. Let's just put her in her place.
Bring her down a couple notches. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's like I said, it's obvious that he's crazy happy. And so I think it's a testament to you guys and how you guys are handling this situation. So I think that's awesome. Taking it in a little bit of a different direction, but similar. It still connects here. Obviously, like, again, following you on social media, it's very clear that you love being active, you love being outdoors, doing all of those things. Now, obviously, in this situation, in this life that you're currently living, health is one of those things for just anybody, right? Like anybody who has a family, job, different stresses throughout life, the health, the fitness, the well-being can kind of go out the window or put to the side because you're so focused on getting everything else that you need to get done. Your situation, again, more extreme because there's more demands and more responsibilities that you have. So like, how have you like maintained staying active, staying healthy, getting out and doing the things that you love while also, being able to handle everything that you have to handle?
I mean, me and his father are both very we don't like being home. You know what I mean? We've always, and since before we even had him, we were just always on the go, riding our bikes at different, places like in the woods and just always outdoors. That's really just that's just a lifestyle. And I think when you create that even before we had a kid, it's just what we do. We're like chronic walkers as well. So like I go and walk everywhere, which my son hates to no end, right? Because he's like, again. And I'm like, you've got 2 dogs, bro. Like, yeah, they're not going to walk themselves. And then we'll go to the dog park and he's like, it's hot. So like, you just can't win. I just stopped trying to win or whatever. But I teach jazzercise classes, right? And that forces me to stay in shape. And then I also like go to the gym.
Sure.
But, with him too, as being a type 1 diabetic, like when we go places like camping and hiking and all that stuff, you always have to have your little grab bag of like, oh, shit hits the fan today. Like the really cool thing that they came out with, if his blood sugar dropped so low that he were to go into a coma, you used to have to like mix this vial with this, glucose, this sugar, and then inject it into them. And now they legit have a nose spray. Just a little nose spray. Yeah. Wow. I haven't had to use it. Thank God. I don't know how that's going to work, but apparently it's just a nose spray and it's supposed to, wake him up like Sleeping Beauty. I'm like, okay, well, hopefully that's the case. But if we go like on a normal hike, I just rely on his pump.
Right.
Maybe that's not smart. I don't know. Maybe sometimes I throw caution to the wind on that one, but we always have his little sugar gummies in case he drops low. Always take our water and snacks and everything else. But then if we go camping, we have to actually take his insulin and like just a backup of supplies, like the actual syringes, actual site, all the equipment, just in case anything were to fail.
Sure.
And then, just a shit ton of ice packs and ice and make sure that, because your insulin has to be refrigerated as well. If it's in his pump, it only lasts, we change it every 3 days because once the insulin gets warm for so long, it's not active. It doesn't work anymore in your body. So, you just do it. I don't know. Some people would rather sit at home and other people are crackheads like me and just want to stay busy and are not homebodies. So I'm like, I don't care what we're doing. We're outside. I'm sitting on my patio right now. Like, I don't want to be inside listening to them talk about Fortnite.
Yeah.
Or Minecraft.
If you guys are just listening to this and not watching this, if you saw Andrea's face right now, you would know how she feels about Fortnite.
I just let him start playing this game like in the last couple of months. Like I held off so hard from it. And I was like, you know what? Fine.
You regret it. You regret it now. It's like, man, I should have held out a little longer.
Well, we didn't let him do like video games or he just got a Switch for Christmas. So like we didn't let him do any of that stuff until now because I didn't want him to be obsessed with all of that and distracted from the world. Like my kid still has a great imagination. He's the kid that goes and rallies all the other kids in the complex to play outside still. Oh, and I love that. And that's because I forced it on him for so long.
All those forced walks. He's like, oh, we gotta walk again.
Walks. He's like, oh, we gotta do something. Let's
look what it did to your creativity.
Seek. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That's awesome. Where's your so it seems like you go hiking and all that stuff quite a bit. What's your favorite local hike?
I mean, realistically, like I go to Auburn a lot just because it's really there's so many trails right there by the river. Yeah. That's pretty much like, I mean, that's a quick place to go. A lot of times we'll just drive up Highway 80 and like, look on the map, like, is there a hike that we haven't been on lately? Or, I mean, I'll go out to 50 once in a while, Highway 50, but I live in Antelope. And so I'm just kind of like on the outskirts out here and driving to Highway 50 now takes me like 40 freaking minutes, which is longer. Crazy. Yeah. I'm like, but different lakes, all the hikes around like the different lakes. Jenkinson is super nice. And then anywhere up 50, there's just a lot of really pretty places. And also go with his dad every once in a while. So his dad's actually a photographer, a night photographer. Oh, cool. And so that's awesome. He's super talented, which is cool. He's got all the good spots. Yeah, he's got all the cool spots, and you're like, what are you doing on this weekend without your child? Like
just getting a dope shot.
Whatever. Yeah, legit. I'm like,
man,
I want to go.
The Auburn thing, I know some people that are like big runners, like marathon runners, ultra runners and stuff like that. They do a lot of stuff up there. they've posted too many pictures with snakes. I don't even go that way. Snakes terrify me. I'm like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
I go other places where I know there's no snakes, but that Auburn area, and it sucks too because it's beautiful. I've seen the pictures, like I would love to, and then I see like a huge rattlesnake. Like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good. I haven't seen any snakes since I've been there by myself. But
really,
I think it'd probably only take once, and I'd be like, no,
yeah,
I'm out.
That's surprising because it seems like you go quite a bit. So you've never seen one.
No, you know what? Maybe it's because I have the dogs with me all the time. I don't know if they scare them away.
That's a good point.
They might scare them away, but I've been lucky.
I was riding my bike one time on the was it the American River Trail? And I was like by like Cordova High School around that area, and I saw a rattlesnake on the path. Yeah, and I'm like, I got home so fast. Like, didn't even see. I've never even seen a snake on that stupid trail. That's like, I was flying. Of course. Yeah. I hate them. Yeah, I know. That's a sidetrack. This is not a snake podcast.
They're gnarly. I know. We actually had a friend get bit by a rattlesnake, and he almost lost his leg. Yeah, really? He was. I think he was in El Dorado. He was just like out there on a trail in El Dorado, and thankfully he was able to get back. Or somebody carried him or something, because it was pretty touch and go there for a while. He was in the hospital for like a few days. Like, it was bad. You don't realize how deadly these things are, right? Until
I know. And the crazy thing is, they don't want to mess with you, right? Like, it's not like they're not like seeking you out. It's usually like I've heard like people like step over a rock, step over a log. It's just an accidental thing. But I know some people that have snakes for pets. I'm like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this?
Did you know? Snakes, and this is like, I'm pretty sure. I mean, don't quote me, but I've been told by people who own snakes that you can never fully domesticate a snake, because the only reason they don't bite you is because they've already sized you up and they know they can't eat you. That's it. It's that primal. Yeah. They don't love you. They don't love you. No, they just can't eat you. So
that's terrifying.
Don't put your baby around a snake.
You know what's funny? I feel like early on in this podcast, maybe like episode 15 or maybe around 20, we had someone that does he owns a fly fishing company, and I feel like he said something very similar about how snakes size you up. Or no, the snake was owned by a lady, and it was really sizing her up the whole time. And so this must be true, people. Like, if you're listening to this, this is the second time this has happened. So it has to be. Stay away from snakes, and don't.
Well, and everybody's been around snakes before. Like, they're not domesticated. They're not. Most reptiles aren't. Like, okay, go put a leash on your lizard, but I'm just saying, like, again, they sized you up. They can't eat you. Like,
that's what I'm saying too.
If they're meat eaters, I don't know.
Yeah, and again, like it's my thing too with that is, like, I love dogs. Dogs are fun. They are companions. They're not trying to eat you. They're not trying to eat your face off.
Yeah.
A snake, like, you look at it one time, it's like, cool. Let's look at how dope that thing is. That's it. The rest of the time, it just sits there. It doesn't do anything for you.
And why would you want to have it in a cage? Like, I had a friend, and she was dating this guy who, like, was doing the whole snake thing and had all the rats, and were like, breeding the rats to feed them. And I was like, you guys are fucking animals. Why do you need all these poor, helpless little rats? And why do you need the snake in a cage? Like, I'm sorry. I'm not going to judge you if you like snakes and you have them in cages, but I'm just truly hippy dippy in my soul. And I'm like, let that shit free. It's meant to be in nature. It doesn't need to be in your house in a cage.
Yeah.
Just doesn't. I'm not a big fan of birds either. Like, I like birds in nature. When you're putting it in a cage, it's just so, like, some cold ass shit. It
really is. When
it's like you being in prison. Right. Do you want to be in prison? Is that how it feels? What did you do to deserve being in prison?
You guys think about that.
You were just born, and you're like, you don't want to hear the bird anymore. You just put a towel over it. Like, that's so fucked up.
The towel thing is weird. Yeah.
It's sad. It's so sad.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I'll be honest. I'm not hippy dippy. I just think it's creepy. Like, certain animals are just like, why? Like, why are we doing this?
Why? But why?
We're in, like, we're thinking in different lanes, but we're on the same page. You know what I mean? Like,
that's fine. We can go with it. I'm like, free them all.
Yeah, like, just get them out of the house.
They have souls. They care.
Get them.
What are you doing?
Out. Yeah. Why? So I'm with you. I think, and I am judging you guys. She's not. I am. If you have a snake, don't. This is nonsense. That's
why. Come on.
That's my rant about snakes.
Right.
So sorry, I have just a couple of thoughts here. Pull up my notes real quick. One of the things I was curious about, kind of going back to the diabetes thing, is the connection. Obviously, it's called Connectable, and you know, we're all about connecting with people. That's why we have guest songs. We want to connect with them, and then hopefully they connect with their audience and vice versa. But when you're in the midst of all of this craziness, I guess it's kind of two questions, but it has to do with connection and the community that you're connected with. Did you like find your way into a community of other parents who deal with the same thing? And how much closer did you get with the community that you were already a part of, like family, friends, you know, all that stuff?
Yeah. Well,
I got the finger
I mean,
point,
that's,
which usually
yeah.
my co-host does like the double guns every once in a while. I haven't
Yeah.
gotten that from a guest. So yeah. Watch out,
Um,
Deb. Andrea's coming for your spot if you keep
right,
hanging
right.
out in San Luis Obispo instead of showing up for our podcast. Not a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you know, you're first like in any situation where it's traumatic and you're like looking for support, where do you go? Like on Facebook, right? Or some type of group. So like there's a bunch of groups on Facebook and you're like, oh, okay, I'll join this. I was on that Facebook, the groups, the many groups for like maybe a week, maybe a week. And then I was like, fuck this, because all that people did on these groups were rant, was talk about death, their kids dying.
Oh,
I mean,
geez.
for a 2.5-year-old diagnosis, you're like, I don't want to hear this. Like, is there just like a positive type 1 diabetes page where we can talk about the fact that, you know what, at least he can walk, at least he's not dying.
Right.
Yeah, you know, like there was just a lot of like very negative things being said in a lot of those groups. And there's some other ones, like I actually reached out a couple of years ago, like when COVID hit, maybe it was like right after COVID was kind of like not so bad. Like, so last year, 2021. Sure. And I tried to reach out to some people on these different groups and see like, do you guys want to meet up? Because at the time, my son was like really kind of going through it and feeling like nobody else that he knows is a type 1 diabetic. And he didn't have any friends. And so we had gone and we actually drove all the way up to Reading, and I met a couple who was living even further away from there. And we met halfway, and she had 3 kids with type 1 diabetes. And the 2 of them were his age. Yeah. And the other one was like younger than him. And it was crazy. But shockingly, like I couldn't find very many people to meet up out here. And I know that certain school districts have more type 1 diabetics, like Natomas apparently has a lot of type 1 diabetics. But so yeah, the Facebook thing.
How did you find that out? That seems like a crazy piece of information.
I'm pretty sure I found that out from my mother-in-law, who works here in Antelope at a school district. And so, because they had like no diabetics at her school, and she's been doing it for 20 years. So she's familiar with it in general, but yeah, something about the Natomas area. I guess there was like 10, or no, maybe it was one of the nurses too that was working with him. Somebody told me, I don't know who it was, but could have been the hospital. So he actually goes to a specialist, and he's got a whole team of doctors, and he sees them every 3 months, and they do like they draw his blood, they do all these tests, they check in on us. We've got a social worker, we've got a nutritionist, and they're just like, so Kaiser's not all bad, you know. Obviously there's some good people once you're actually diagnosed, but yeah. And then so no Facebook for the groups, like that was just not going to work for us. And then it was actually pretty disappointing. So like our family and friends actually came through. Well, our family came through to an extent. And like my mom and my dad were both just like, no, like I'm too scared to do this. And so they stopped watching him for a while because she was too afraid that she would mess it up, And my dad still to this day has nothing to do with him when it comes to any of that. But my ex's dad and stepmom and his mom, they all stepped up to the plate, and they started watching him a lot. And he actually lives with them right now. His dad, my ex, lives with the grandparents right now. And so we got really lucky with that. But then, surprisingly, when Dean was diagnosed, we were in our mid 20s. Okay. Mid to late 20s. And we probably only had a couple of friends come to the hospital. It was actually it was not a good time in our life, to be honest with you, because when you go through I mean, I know that people will say this, like when you go through something traumatic or a divorce or anything like that, you find out who your real friends are really quick. And our kid being diagnosed with this life altering thing actually shifted our friend group quite a bit, because most of them just didn't give two shits. We were actually like, my husband at the time was supposed to go on like a bachelor party trip, and hadn't paid yet. And it was only like $75. It wasn't even crazy. And he hadn't paid yet. And within that week when he was going to be paying is when our son was diagnosed. And he got so much backlash from this stupid bachelor trip because he hadn't paid. And at that point, we're like, well, we're not paying now. He's not going on the trip. And we don't even know all this shit we're going to have to buy for this situation that turned out to be so much bigger than we could have ever imagined. And so I think he talks to them now, but it took several years where we were just kind of like floored by the lack of support that we got from, we had a pretty big friend group at the time too. And just a lot of disappointment, quite honestly. And so now, you know, we have our own separate friends, and he still talks to some of those people, and we're still really close. But all the people that are in my life, you know, they know what's going on with my son, and I've got some friends that'll watch my son, and they're on board with all of it. And you really kind of find out who's on your side and who's just doesn't give a shit because they're only invested in themselves. And I think that's part of growing up in general, right? Having kids and growing up and realizing like the friends that didn't have kids, who's going to stick around, who's not.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. Like that's kind of a natural part of life, right? Like the circle tends to get smaller and smaller as you go throughout life because people move, life situations change. But usually it's like the normal stuff, right? Like you have families, your jobs, you're not available as much. But and that stuff, like I feel like for me personally, it's more understandable. Like there's some people that get really offended by that. Me, it's like that's going to happen. Your situation is a little different because, like you said, in a situation like that, typically, and I'm not gonna lie, that was not the answer I was expecting. It was a really good answer. Unfortunately, it was a terrible.
It was the wrong answer.
Like,
yeah,
no,
that sucked. It fucking sucked.
Yeah, well, because you hope that you hear all these stories from other people that are in situations where, you know, their child or their loved one has cancer, or and then you see this like massive community of people like rally around them.
Absolutely.
That, I'm not gonna lie, that's what I was expecting. So
I know, right? Like, you want me to be a freaking special on Netflix? That's not it. I'll tell you what. Me and my husband were actually already like in like this very dark place in our marriage before he got diagnosed. And when he got diagnosed, it was like, well, shit, I guess we're not fucking breaking up now because we only had each other to rely on. And it actually, I want to tell you, like, it kept us together for the 3 years longer that we were still married. So like if my son hadn't been diagnosed, we would have already been divorced long before we actually got divorced. But everything happens for a reason. It is what it is, you know, can't go back in time. But
yeah, for sure.
Thankfully we still get along. So none of that's an issue, but.
Well, yeah, that's, I mean, well, but again, that goes like, yeah, that's great. Cause I mean, obviously it goes back to that trust thing, right? Like, cause if you didn't, and we all know people like everybody that's listening to this right now, you know, people, I know people that's not the situation. And there's some people I know, it's like
it's definitely not
any moment they get to talk about the other person in a negative way, they're taking the shot.
Oh,
and so
game on. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so
I got friends like that too.
Yeah. I think we all do, right?
We all have friends like that.
Oh no, we're gonna talk.
And I'm like, oh yeah, he or she fucked you over bad. Like I got you. I get it. But it's,
like,
you know,
every conversation has to go to direction. Like at a certain point, like maybe start a blog. You know what I mean?
I take accountability, you know, like for everything. Like I'm dating, right? Like I'm dating and I'm like, everybody's like, oh, how's it going? Different people. And I'm like, I'm learning. Is it good? And I'm like, it's fine. Like
it's fine.
You're learning. I'm learning. It can't be that bad. Like I regret nothing, you know, no regrets, not even one letter. So I'm like, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Yes, it's about taking accountability for who you are, right?
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, absolutely. And I think everybody should, regardless of the situation. Like that's an important thing to do for sure. Again, if you don't mind, because we don't know each other, so I don't want to pry. But like I wasn't, and I didn't have this on my notes, but like the dating thing, obviously, with your situation, I imagine that's got to come up pretty quickly, right? And that's kind of a big, obviously, it's a big piece of your. it's your life. It's not even a big piece of your life. It is.
I mean,
your
having
life.
a kid in general
Right.
when you're dating, right,
Right.
is like, surprise, I've got a 9-year-old.
Right.
Like,
And then,
and Dean,
by the way,
you know, by the way, there's that kid over there in the corner. Yeah, that's mine. Thankfully, you know, my kid's super goofy too. And so like anytime he's like probably like a little spy when it comes to like him eavesdropping. My best friend, she's like, your kid is like a fucking spy. Like my kids would just tune out and do their own thing. She's like, your kid legit like he acts like he's not paying attention and he's listening to everything. And I'm like, yeah, I know it's a problem.
He's
but
listening to this now, he's like, that podcast sucked.
Thankfully he's inside. Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
No, but he'll say shit like I'll be talking about a guy to like one of my friends and he's like, is that gonna be my new stepdad? And then he'll just like start laughing and he's like, stepdaddy. And I'm like, you're gonna scare him away. Can you not? Please don't ever say that out loud again. If I'm on the phone, if anyone's over, like this is terrible. But yeah, him being a diabetic, it gets brought up because it depends on how long I'm talking to somebody, of course. But it's like,
sure.
It, you know, it actually doesn't, it gets brought up eventually, but more or less just because I'm like on the phone and I'm like, you need to dose for that. What are you doing? And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? You have to dose for what? And I'm like, oh yeah.
It's my 9-year-old. Don't worry about it.
Yes. Well, and it's funny too, because I'll be like, dude, you're so high right now. You're so high right now. And they're just like, wait, what? And I'm like, oh my God, no, his blood sugar is high right now. Sorry. My kid's not on drugs. We're good.
Yeah. You're not just like pulling out the needles on the first date. Like, hey, you know.
Right. I need a sample.
Yeah, don't worry, it's for my kid. Yeah, a sample. That's awesome. No, that's interesting. But again, like, you know, I could ask probably any questions about any aspect of your life, and like it's all touched by this situation, you know. And again, you seem to be handling it like a champ from how you're talking right now. So good for you.
Yeah, we're still laughing, you know, that's doing something right.
Well, hey, and that laughter, I mean, you would probably know better than anybody. You always hear quotes like, hey, laughter is the best medicine, you know, how contagious laughter is, how important it is to our lives. And you could, here's the thing too. And you probably had moments like this. You probably have moments like this where you just want to sit in a dark room and shut everybody out, and like laughter is the furthest thing from my mind right now.
Right.
But the fact that you're choosing to laugh, the fact that you're choosing to go outside and still explore the world and nature and get out there and date and do all these normal things. Yeah. Like it's probably the best perspective that someone could have in your situation, because it's probably going to be the healthiest for you. Right. Yeah. It's a
good thing I'm not a homebody, right? Because
see, I am.
Could get dark.
A homebody. Yeah. I get out.
Dark.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah,
it's gotten dark in the past. Yeah,
right. But as someone who's not a homebody, like it's gotten dark for you. And yeah, you're right. A homebody.
Right. 2020, that shit was rough for me.
I bet. I'm not gonna, I've said this before, not to make light of all this stuff. I'm like, you know, for me, I'm like, I'm a homebody. It's like,
you're like, hey, it was a bed.
Like I don't have to make.
You're like, wait a minute, I can't order my food. What's happening? You know, like that's the biggest inconvenience. You know, like, ran out of toilet paper. What a weird thing.
Yeah, that was the whole thing. And it's weird too.
What? Yeah, is it locked? I don't know. Sure. Be smart. I don't know, they're in my purse. Sorry.
That's all good. We've had kids on the podcast before, kids, dogs, cats. It's all good. Yeah.
All of it.
all of it. Sometimes at the same time, we're like, yeah, it's fine.
Right.
So it would be weird if he didn't make an appearance, because we've been talking about him the whole time. So
yeah. Of course, the switch stopped working, so you know, naturally
that's the podcast right now. Yeah, I get that. Right. Hey, if Disney Plus crashes on us at any point, we're like, uh-oh. Right. It's gonna be a problem. Everybody buckle up. It's like all of a sudden I turn into like a tech guy. I'm like, I gotta figure this out.
Right.
What is going on here? No, it's just well, first of all, again, I've said this before, but I appreciate you sharing all that you've shared. Like I said, hopefully this helps someone. Even if you guys don't have someone in your life or someone that you care for that is diabetic, again, a lot of the stuff you're saying could apply to any situation, any hardship, any challenge in life. Like all that stuff could apply, and just the mentality. The mental toughness that I imagine that you developed. I don't know if you were a crazy mentally tough person before, but it either got way stronger or you know what I mean. Right. You know, or you learned how to do it, like, you know, because like you said, the kind of the theme of it is that you have no choice. Like you just have to do it.
Yeah.
Because the person that you love, they're counting on it. And so, definitely appreciate you sharing everything that you've shared. Are there any, before we get out of here, because I'm looking at the time and we've been talking for a little while now, is there any, so again, connectable connection, are there any resources that you would suggest? Obviously not the Facebook groups, stay away from those.
Stay away from the Facebook groups.
Very dark. Other than that, like any resources or people can follow?
To be honest, like I kind of stay away from a lot of it. There's always going to be, certain, like, I think there's like Beyond Type 1. That's something that I follow on Instagram. And then like I follow like certain people that are type 1 diabetics, but unfortunately, like there's really not a lot. We've got something out here called JDRF, and it's the Juvenile Diabetes something fund. I don't know. And they do like walks, and they actually have like a pretty decent, like, I don't know if you'd even call it a support system. I didn't utilize it enough to know enough about it, but I know that it exists, and it's worth checking out if you want to, I guess. I don't know. Okay. I don't know. We're kind of like lone wolves, me and his dad. We just kind of did it all by ourselves because a lot of the things we tried to seek out just weren't helpful. And we get help from Kaiser for the most part. Like I said, we've got a whole team of people that we work with, but it's always nice meeting other type 1s. So if there's anyone out there that wants to chat, like I'm always down, always available, because it's Perfect. There's more people that are type 1 than you realize, but it's hard to get connected to them. I feel like if it's not through a Facebook group where everybody's just complaining, and I'm like, I don't want to hear about this right now.
Can't do that. Well, it's the last thing you need, right? It's like
legit. Like my life is hard enough as it is when it comes to like the stuff we have to do on a daily basis with him. Like, I don't need to hear you tell me all of your woes as well. Like,
right.
I'm just not that kind of person. Some people really do enjoy, and they get, whatever they need out of that vent session, and that's fine.
Sure.
But
it's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody.
I know I said I was going to wrap this up, but I lied. That happens sometimes on this podcast. Like we have a direction, then take a rabbit trail. So in your opinion, why is it, because you said it's difficult to get connected to other people in that same boat, which again, going back to other causes, other, like I have an aunt who has ALS, and she's had ALS for quite a while now. They have, runs, walks. They have this like massive community that shows up to all these things in these different events, and she's gotten connected to different people. Cancer. I mean, the Susan Komen run, massive, right? There's these different causes, and you'd always like, I guess my assumption before this conversation was that just automatically people rally around, but it sounds like that's not necessarily the case. And so why, in your opinion, is it challenging to connect?
Like I said, it's called JDRF, and they do walks and they do runs and stuff. We don't keep up with it. So we're part of the problem, I guess, in that sense. But we did it when he was first diagnosed, the first couple of years. And maybe now as an adult, it would be different, like later, a little bit older now, and he's older. And so if we went back out to it, I could probably make more connections. But what's interesting is that when you go to these walks, like for him, and I just think back to like when we actually did it, everybody's there with their families, right? And everybody's there to support the cause. But there wasn't a lot of mingling going on when we were there, which I thought was interesting. It was almost like when when you're running like a 5K and you're like, yeah, we're all here doing this thing, but like nobody's talking about it. Like what's happening right now?
That's a good point.
Yeah. So I just feel like, a lot of times if you meet people through friends and family, like that's the best way, or schools, some Facebook groups aren't all terrible. Like I said, I did find other parents who were accessible to an extent, but then they could never meet up at the right times. And we're past that stage of needing to vent about it, I guess.
Sure.
If that makes sense. I don't know. So
yeah,
it's just one of those things. I don't know. Every situation's different, but we're kind of just lone wolf in it.
Yeah. Well, and if it works, it works. You know what I mean? If
it's
it
fine,
works, that's the main thing. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. that's interesting, the race thing, because you're right. Like you show up with a group, and you kind of do your own thing, and then everybody's together. So like it looks nice because there's this massive group of people supporting the cause.
Right.
But as
Right.
far as connection, there's not a whole lot there. We actually, someone we've had on this podcast before, his name is Trevor Fong. He's a entrepreneur, and he does something called Mix and Mingle in Sacramento. And it's basically an opportunity for business owners, business people, entrepreneurs to get together and mix and mingle. I mean, it's the name says
Nice.
it all, but
yeah.
It's almost like something like that would be really beneficial for some of these
Yeah.
groups, where the whole point is it's like, hey, you're not coming here to run. You're
Right.
coming here to mix and
Network,
mingle.
talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trevor,
Get
if you're
to
out
know
there and listening to
people.
this, maybe
Right. Right.
you know a ton of people, man.
Seriously.
But that's interesting. I think I've never heard it phrased that way, and I've been to plenty of runs and things like that. But that's a really good point. Yeah, somebody may have to get on that, because I think that'd be a really beneficial thing.
I know, now that I'm saying it, I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I guess I could probably facilitate something.
Hey, if I don't, not that I want credit for this idea, and like
right,
where it, you know, spawned from, but if you want to throw our name out there, that'd be awesome. I wouldn't complain about it. Yeah. I thought of this idea on the Connectable podcast.
Right. Oh my gosh, that would make so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
One more question before we get out of here. This one's completely random. And I'm pretty sure this is you. If this is not you, then please forgive me and just ignore this question. Do you love Post Malone? Is that you? Okay. I'm like, okay, you do. Sometimes like I'm thinking,
yes,
like,
I do.
I feel like I've seen you post a lot about that. Like then I'm like, was it actually her or was it someone else? Okay.
It's yeah, you know, his birthday's coming up. He was born on July 4th. So
I'll be honest, I did not know
Independence Day baby. And
he's
gonna be, let's see, he's gonna be 27. He's 7 years younger than me. I know it's kind of gross when I say it out loud, but it's Post Malone. Whatever, we're good.
It's fine. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't listen to a ton of his music, so I'm not up on I'm not current with Post Malone right now. But again, since this is connectable, like what is it about his music that connects with you so much? Like I'm always interested. Like we've had some artists on here before, and it's like it's fun hearing like what it is, because music connects people, right? And like we connect with artists for certain reasons, and like what is it about him?
There's plenty of his music that's crass, you know, and it's kind of whatever. But I think I like him and his music just in general because of who he seems to be. Obviously, you don't really know these people, but every interview he does, right? Every little meet and greet, every little thing that he's showcasing who he is, it always lines up with the same type of persona that he's putting out there. And he just seems like a cool ass dude who you could literally sit and get high with and talk about the universe and the craziness of the government and like just life. Like for being his age too, like even when he was younger, like he's just really down to earth. And it didn't sound like he was just like a typical, like, let all the money go to his head. And he was just super cocky. Like he just seems kind of like a pretty mellow, laid back dude. And then that makes you like his music even more, you know, like you want to just get in a mood with it. And then, you know, I relate some of his music when I was like going through my divorce. And so some of the songs I was like, you know, yes, this is over now. You know,
this dude gets it. Yeah.
It's like,
it feels like he's speaking directly to you, right?
Legit. Yeah. I was like, oof. So I think you just attribute it to like whatever time you are in your life when you like hear these certain things and they just hit you differently. But I actually haven't really been listening to his like latest music. I haven't checked it out in a minute because I'm in a different spot in my life right now. But no, I always love Post Malone. Only man with face tattoos that I will think twice about. No
That's
offense.
Good.
No
Any
offense.
dudes out there that have face tattoos,
sorry,
you thought maybe you reach out, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
That face tattoo guy probably has snakes too. You know what I mean? Pet
snakes. Legit.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Seriously.
A lot of bad decisions. A lot of bad decisions that we actually just talked about face tattoos a couple episodes ago. Yeah.
A lot of decisions.
It could be a whole different conversation.
That's a whole different. I know. I was literally thinking about this guy I just found on a dating app who had this giant face tattoo, and I was like, he's kind of hot. And then I found out some other things about him, and I was like, yeah, I'm just not gonna do that.
It goes. Yeah.
There it goes.
The face tattoo is a bold choice. Like I don't have any tattoos.
Bold choice.
But the face tattoo is like, you know, I heard it on a podcast. Like if you make that choice, then you're like, when it comes to what you can do for a career,
legit,
you're likely like limiting yourself. You have to be.
It's so funny you say
Post Malone.
So I saw this guy on the dating app literally just last night, and my friend, she came over and we were sitting here, and it was late, maybe it's a couple nights ago, and she just randomly come over. She's like, I'm coming over. She's going through a divorce, and she's going through it. And so it was like I was in bed. It was like 11:30, and she's like, I'm coming over, and I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And we're sitting out back having a beer, and it's like midnight, you know, and I find this guy on Bumble or whatever, and he's got this giant face tattoo, but he was really hot otherwise. And so I'm like, you know what, it's kind of late, but maybe I'll message him. And she's like, do you think he has a 9-to-5 office job, Drea? Look at his face. Like he's used to these hours. I was like, sure as shit. He messaged right back. And I was like, yeah.
Your friend called it. It makes sense. Yeah. Hey, no judgment here. I'm just like, from the outside, I'm like, man, it's a bold choice. That's all I'm gonna say. It's a bold
choice.
They're
committed to the lifestyle or whatever that may be.
You got to be able to play guitar, rap, sing. You got to be able to do something, or you're a tattoo artist. Yeah. So anyways, like I said, we could do a whole podcast about that, but we're not going to.
We could do like a whole separate section on dating in and of itself, because that shit is insane. Right,
you may need to connect with my co-host, because she has another podcast. We just keep creating podcasts for some reason. We love it that much.
That's awesome.
But yeah, she has a podcast called Not Here to Judge, and it's kind of targeted towards a female audience for sure. And she's shared plenty of crazy dating stories on there.
I'm sure. That sounds wonderful.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's pretty wild out there. So it's a bummer that she was. Maybe if you come on the show again, Deb will be here, and you may find yourself getting an invite onto that podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. That's the podcast that, you know, every woman wants to start with her friends, is like, let's just talk about all of our crazy experiences, because they're entertaining at the very least, you know?
Oh yeah. And she definitely has some, I've told her before, I'm going to be honest, I don't listen to all of them. I skim through.
Yeah.
And Deb McCollum, if you're listening, they told a story about Taco Bell. That's all I'm going to say. It was horrifying. It was horrifying. And it brought a lot of joy to me and my brother when we listened to it. But anyways, if you guys want to hear that, go check that podcast out.
Right.
But hey, so I don't know if you're cool with this, but if someone wants to reach out to you, if they have questions about your situation, how you deal with it, all life, whatever it may be, where can they follow you on Instagram or any other social media that you feel comfortable dropping?
I pretty much just do Instagram. I'm not really big on Facebook, obviously, as you can tell. I'm not a huge Facebook supporter. But on Instagram, my tag is just Monster Drea. And so it's MONSTERDRAYA.
Okay, I said last question. I lied again. The second time I lied about this. Okay, because you do have a very unique handle. You do have a unique handle. What is
I also
about?
I only send black hearts as well. Just say, my friends are like, why is it always black? I'm like, it's always black.
So don't be terrified. It's all good.
So yeah, when I was like 16, I worked for Roundtable, and my little name tag had Cookie Monster all over it. And so for some reason, like my name tag said Monster Drea when I was 16, and I don't know, it just stuck. That's it. The short of it. It's it. It's nothing crazy exciting.
Dang. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of sorry I answered the question. Now I wish I would have just let that one go, and then I could have just
made it cooler. It could have been cooler.
You got into a fight or something, or you were constantly getting into fights. Like, oh, it's Monster.
Yeah. I'm so scrappy. I'm like literally the least confrontational person you'll ever meet. I'm like like I think I get all excited, and I'm like, and then when it comes down to it, I'm like, you know what, everything's cool. Like, we should really just talk about this. Like, why are you guys even fighting? Like, can we all just get along? You know?
Yeah, let's start a Facebook group together. It'll be fine. Work this out. All right. Well, seriously, I shouldn't have asked that question, because now it was like a little bit of a disappointment. I didn't think Cookie Monster was involved at all.
Thanks.
This was a great podcast until I asked that stupid question. I should know better. We've done this long enough. Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for hanging out and chatting with us, or chatting with me.
Thank you.
And sharing all that. It's been fun. And it was good talking to you, and good luck with everything. And
thank you.
Yeah, we hope that, everything just continues to go well for you guys, and that, hopefully eventually at some point, like your son mentioned, hopefully at some point they find a cure for this bad boy, and then you can be just done with it.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You too. Thanks for watching the show. If you enjoyed that episode, make sure you like it, share it, and hit the subscribe button to get a new episode every week. We'll see you next time on the Connectable podcast.